1 month before my SATs, I was stopped right at the school gate. A strange couple approached me, claiming I was their long-lost daughter. I looked closely. Their facial features did bear a striking resemblance to mine. So, without hesitation, I decided to go home with them. There was no deep emotional reason. Simply put, I had mastered the theory of the real versus fake heiress trope from reading too many web novels. Getting to experience it firsthand was the practical exam I had been waiting for. On the way to the Miller estate, Mr. and Mrs. Miller kept rubbing their hands together, looking awkward. They didn't seem to know how to start a conversation. Being the observant person I am, I broke the ice. "Mom, Dad, if you have any questions, just ask." Hearing me call them Mom and Dad for the first time, they both froze. Then, relief washed over their faces, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. Mrs. Miller asked softly, "Sweetie, how have you lived all these years? Did your adoptive parents treat you well?" I slowly rolled my eyes mentally, choosing my words carefully. It was fine. My adoptive father passed away early. The family is considered well off. I have an older brother, 3 years my senior, and a younger sister. I was simply stating facts, but Mrs. Miller's eyes filled with pity. She reached out as if to hug me, but when I slightly dodged, she hesitated and pulled her hand back. Raising 3 children alone, life must have been hard. My poor child, you have suffered. Mrs. Miller wiped her tears as she spoke. Observing her haggard face and eyes full of love, I started to believe this biological mother truly missed me. On the other hand, Mr. Miller had barely spoken since we got in the car. He looked like he cared about Mrs. Miller, but even when supporting her, his touch was light, lacking the intimacy of a normal couple. I noted these details in my mind, but kept a poker face. In my adoptive family, my name is Serena Vance. You can call me Serena. Mr. and Mrs. Miller nodded. I was lost when I was only 15 days old, so I didn't even have a name back then. Perhaps thinking of this, Mrs. Miller couldn't hold back her tears again, making my nose tingle a bit too. Finally, the car stopped in front of the Miller residence. It was a 3-story villa in the suburbs, elegant and stylish. Stepping into this place, I officially became a bona fide heiress. As soon as the door opened, a girl about my age was standing in the living room. Her eyes were red and swollen. It's happening. The real versus fake heiress show is officially starting. I suppressed my excitement and looked at the girl with feigned surprise. "Mom? Dad? Who is she?" Before the Millers could answer, the girl went from teary-eyed to full-on sobbing. "Mom, Dad, do you not want me anymore?" Outwardly, I frowned. Inwardly, I was screaming. "Yes, this is exactly the vibe." Mrs. Miller looked torn between me and the girl. On one side was the adopted daughter she raised for 17 years. On the other was the biological daughter she just found. For a mother, hesitation was understandable. At that moment, Mr. Miller stepped in to take charge. "Serena, this is your sister, Kylie Miller. Since you said the Vance family raised 3 kids, their finances might be tight. I think we should let Kylie stay. After all, the Miller family has raised her for many years. I never said the Vance family had financial problems, but I didn't correct him. I just silently assessed Kylie Miller standing before me. I hadn't said a word or done anything yet, but she bit her lip and took 2 steps back as if I had threatened her. "Sister, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to steal Mom and Dad. If you don't like me, I'll go back to my biological parents." After saying that, Kylie pretended to rush out. But she only took 2 steps before her body went limp, and she fainted right there. Mr. and Mrs. Miller rushed to support her. Mrs. Miller even carefully looked back to check my reaction. Kylie weakly opened her eyes. "Sister, I'm sorry. I really want to leave, but I don't feel well. Can you let me rest until tomorrow morning and then I'll go?" On the surface, she looked like an obedient little rabbit, but I caught a glimpse of cunning in her eyes. Mr. Miller looked at his precious daughter with heartache, his face showing anger. Serena, why are you so unreasonable? Your sister Kylie doesn't need to go anywhere. Everything stays the same as before. I interrupted him directly, choking his words in his throat. Of course. A real versus fake heiress drama needs both parties under the same roof to be interesting. Kylie's act was disgusting, so I didn't need to build a gentle, understanding image. I tucked my hair behind my ear, looked down at the floor, and feigned loneliness. When I was little at the Vance house, I used to help take care of my sister. From first grade, I had to pick her up from school. Actually, my sister and I were in the same class, and we often ditched the nanny to sneak to the park. From third grade, I cooked for her. Only, the few times I made omelets, I almost burned the house down, and both my sister and I got 5 whacks on the hand. In middle and high school, I even had to help her with homework. This was a complete lie. My sister's grades never worried anyone. If she knew I said this, she would throw a fit. I managed to squeeze out a few tears. I looked up and forced a smile. I've never been an only child. But it's okay. I will take good care of Sister Kylie in the future. Mr. Miller and Kylie froze. Mrs. Miller's heart broke. She rushed over and hugged me, crying. Silly child. You are home now. No one will bully you anymore, and you don't need to take care of anyone. Mr. Miller didn't dare to get angry now, and Kylie, who benefited from the situation, couldn't act more pathetic than me, so she stayed silent. Initially, the Millers arranged for my room to be next to Kylie's. But after today's conversation, Mrs. Miller seemed dissatisfied with Kylie's behavior. She ordered the servants to clean up the small room next to hers, keeping me closer, and asked the housekeeper to buy me more daily necessities. That night, I lay on the big bed, hugging my laptop and typing furiously, my eyes shining with excitement. Ding! A message notification sounded. Seeing the sender was Julian Vance, I couldn't help but smile. Julian. Serena, where did you go? I checked the surveillance and saw you being led away at the school gate. Ivy was about to call the police. Serena, relax. I'm staying with my biological parents for a few days. Julian. Serena. I'm collecting data for my thesis. Don't worry. Julian. The next day, since Kylie and I went to different schools, Mr. and Mrs. Miller split up to drive us. I could feel Mrs. Miller's kindness towards me, and I liked being with her more. But this morning, she said she hoped Mr. Miller and I could bond, so she took Kylie first. Thinking of Mr. Miller's unintentional bias yesterday, I also wanted to investigate this biological father, so I agreed. In the car, Mr. Miller focused on driving, seemingly having no intention of talking. I glanced at him occasionally, then typed on my laptop. Normally, although fathers and daughters at this age might be distant, it shouldn't be this cold. Mr. Miller's behavior was unusual. I silently noted it down. How are your grades at school? Suddenly asking a question made me snap out of my thoughts. Maybe he noticed me observing him, so he couldn't help but speak. I gave 2 awkward laughs. They're okay. Actually, I was just being modest, but Mr. Miller misunderstood, thinking my grades were bad and I was embarrassed to say, "It's bad timing. The SATs are in a month. It's too late to transfer you." The teachers in these public schools are a mixed bag. If you went to the private school Kylie attends, the teachers would be more professional. The inexplicable arrogance in Mr. Miller's words made me frown slightly, but he didn't notice my change and continued to brag. If it doesn't work out, spend some time looking at Kylie's notes. I'm sure she would be willing to tutor you. Kylie is very reassuring. She has many hobbies and even plays the piano. My dissatisfaction gradually turned into amusement. Mr. Miller's description of Kylie was purely a father's pride. But shouldn't a father care about his biological daughter's feelings a little bit? Planting seeds of doubt, I walked into the schoolyard. I was about to enter the classroom when Ivy Vance grabbed my collar and dragged me into a corner. Serena Vance, you are heartless. You said you were going with your biological parents and just left? You didn't tell Mom or Julian, and you even hid it from me. I looked at Ivy's angry face, red as an apple, and couldn't help pinching her cheek. It happened suddenly, Princess. I couldn't explain clearly in the heat of the moment. Seeing Ivy's confess or die expression, I had to promise to explain everything at lunch. Ivy finally let me go and ran to her class. We had been in the same class growing up, but in high school I chose humanities, while Ivy's talent for STEM was insane, so we separated. I rubbed my neck. Even though experiencing the life of a fake versus real heiress was tough, studying was still the main job. Adjusting my mood, I joined the early reading army and studied seriously. What? That Kylie Miller is a natural-born green tea? Even purer than the tea our family sells? After hearing my retelling, Ivy couldn't help but complain. I shrugged and smiled, ignoring it. If it's so suffocating there, why stay? The Vance family doesn't lack money. You are a Vance. You can't be bullied by others. Ivy's words warmed my heart, but immediately after, I took out the laptop from my bag and patted it proudly. It's fine. I'm just there to collect data. With years of experience reading heiress novels, I won't let anyone bully me. Ivy was stunned by my words, her eyes changing from heartache to speechlessness. Serena Vance, you still haven't given up on researching that heiress literature stuff? I put on a serious face. Of course. Actually, since elementary school, I knew I wasn't the Vance family's biological daughter. Although the Vances never treated me like an adopted child, the fact still left a shadow in my heart. I loved reading real versus fake heiress novels to the point of obsession. Then, I came up with a somewhat absurd idea. I wanted to get into the University of Literature, the top school for creative writing, and complete a thesis on the real versus fake heiress genre. Whether the protagonist is the fake heiress, smeared by the real one and ending tragically, or the protagonist is the real heiress, bullied by the fake green tea one, disliked by the whole family. Basically, I had recorded all existing types on the market. How could I research without experimenting? So when the Millers came knocking, I went home with them without hesitation. Thinking that this experience would become a highlight in my thesis, I almost shed tears of joy. Ivy looked at me like I was crazy, then swallowed. Okay, good luck. Finally, Ivy added awkwardly. Protect yourself. If anything happens, remember to call. To prepare for the inspection team, the school let students out early for a general cleaning. I was standing at the school gate, about to call Mrs. Miller to say I was done early, when a figure caught my attention. Julian was wearing a crisp white t-shirt with a blue plaid shirt thrown over it. His whole body exuded a refreshing, gentle, and indescribably clean vibe. Just one semester apart, and you don't recognize me? His tall figure blocked the sun, casting a shadow. Julian bent down slightly to look at me. I was hidden in his shadow. Facing Julian's starry eyes, I couldn't help but grin, standing on my tiptoes to pat his shoulder. Why are you here? I found an internship nearby, so I stopped by to check on you. I sighed, bought 2 ice creams, and sat down under the shade of a tree next to the school. I repeated what I had told Ivy to Julian once more. That's how it is. After speaking, I took a bite of ice cream, eating slowly. Contrary to Ivy, Julian's reaction was much calmer. He listened silently, thought for a moment, and said, "Okay. As long as you ensure your safety, you do you. You don't have to worry about the SATs anyway." As if suddenly thinking of something, Julian frowned. "I thought of a problem. We always assumed you were intentionally abandoned, not switched at birth. But according to the Miller's reaction you just described, they think Kylie is the biological daughter of the Vance family. That's why they didn't look for you all these years." I slapped my forehead. Right. I was a baby picked up by Mom Vance at the hospital and adopted by the Vance family since I was little. They told outsiders that Ivy and I were fraternal twins. But the Miller's reaction suggests they think Kylie and I were switched. So what went wrong in this story? Julian continued. How about this? If our families have a chance to meet, Let's just agree on the switched at birth story first. There might be a secret hidden inside. You have to investigate clearly. Although he didn't know my plan, Julian still supported me unconditionally. I smiled at Julian, thanking him. Suddenly, Julian flicked my forehead. Julian, what are you doing? I rubbed my forehead and slapped his back in return. He laughed heartily, but his voice was very gentle. Serena, don't forget our agreement. I will wait for you at the University of Literature. After saying goodbye to Julian, I turned around and was almost scared to death. I didn't know how long Kylie had been standing across the street. Seeing Julian leave, she slowly walked over. I wanted to spend more time with you, so I told Mom and Dad I would come home with you today. But it seems like you didn't want to see me. Kylie was wearing the uniform of a private school, with a small tie, pleated skirt, and leather shoes. She looked like a noble lady, but her words were nauseatingly sarcastic, especially her eyes, which, intentionally or not, followed Julian's retreating figure, looking very sly. Facing my disdainful gaze, Kylie didn't bother to pretend. She glared at me and walked ahead on her own. I kept a distance of about 3 feet from Kylie. Better to offend a gentleman than a petty person. My accumulated literary knowledge made me more wary of her. Luckily, we finally arrived at the Miller home without incident. It was a hot, early summer day, and we were sweating. Mrs. Miller told us to shower before dinner. Let me use the bathroom in your room. The new body wash Mom bought smells so good. Kylie suddenly said, her eyes curving in a smile, but I could still see the calculation in them. Does a 3-story villa lack bathrooms so much that we have to share? I was curious about what Kylie was planning, so I flashed a sweet smile back. Sure. Thanks, sis. Mrs. Miller nodded happily, seeing us getting along. I went upstairs, scanned Kylie's room, and finally, my eyes stopped on the family photo on the nightstand. It was a standard family of 3. In the photo, Kylie was about 7 or 8, standing in the middle, with Mr. and Mrs. Miller smiling lovingly on both sides. Do people really start to look alike after living together for a long time? I blurted out a whisper, suddenly getting goosebumps. Confirming there were no traps in the bathroom, after showering, I instinctively picked up some stray hairs in Kylie's room. When I went downstairs for dinner, Mr. Miller had returned, but the atmosphere had become strangely tense. I sat down with suspicion, waiting for someone to speak. Serena, how was school today? Mrs. Miller couldn't stand the weird atmosphere and started the conversation with a caring question. As a result, Mr. Miller snorted coldly. Just said her grades were average today, turns out her mind is on other things. Hearing this, I almost guessed what happened. A sharp glare flew towards Kylie. Kylie responded with a smug look, then instantly flipped her face like a Sichuan opera mask, acting wronged. Sister, don't blame me. I'm just worried about you. We are students. Dating early isn't good, especially since that guy looked like a hoodlum. I don't want you hanging out with bad crowds. Delaying the SATs? Mr. Miller looked at Kylie appreciatively, then looked at me with disappointment. Serena, regarding grades, you must learn more from Kylie. He hadn't fulfilled his parenting duties for a single day, yet he put on the airs of a father. Reunited for only 2 days, I really didn't have a good impression of this biological father. I crossed my arms and leaned back in the chair. I don't think that's necessary. Sister Kylie definitely can't help with my studies. Mr. Miller was stunned. Even Mrs. Miller's attempt to intervene froze. I didn't want to talk nonsense anymore. I quickly took out my phone, opened a photo, and placed it on the table. I have been admitted early to the University of Literature. I also received the acceptance letter. To avoid damaging it, I didn't bring it. But the information is real. You can check it yourself. I don't need to take the SATs at all, so don't worry about it. After I revealed my hand, Mr. Miller and Kylie finally settled down a bit. As for Julian, I didn't want him to interact with them for now, so I cleverly reworked the truth. That is my brother from the Vance family. Knowing I was found by my biological parents, he came to school to harass me. I nodded seriously, feeling a bit guilty inside. Mrs. Miller took a deep breath and quickly hugged me tight, seeming terrified that I would leave again. I didn't refuse, gently patting her arm to comfort her, then continued to add fuel to the fire. He also said, "If I'm not his biological sister, then treat me like a child bride. If he can't find a wife later, I have to marry him." Hearing my version of Hooligan Julian, even Kylie looked scared. Mr. Miller clenched his fists, his eyes saying he would absolutely not let her return to the Vance family. I sniffed softly. "Kylie wants to go to the Vance family? She isn't qualified." After knowing I was admitted early to the University of Literature, Mr. Miller didn't forget to use this value. He asked me to tutor Kylie. "Isn't Sister Kylie's grades very good? Does she still need tutoring?" I pretended to be innocent but spoke sarcastically, making Mr. Miller's face look a bit ugly. "Kylie's grades aren't bad, but certainly can't compare to you. Admitted to a top school like the University of Literature." Rarely hearing him compliment me, I tilted my head to think for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, I'm willing to help, but in exchange, let Kylie teach me piano. I've always been interested in piano, and she is good at it." Mr. Miller thought for a moment and agreed. Kylie, claiming to be a piano genius, naturally didn't object. I laughed inwardly. If everything went according to their wishes, I wouldn't be Serena Vance. So I deliberately pretended to be clumsy, dragging out the piano practice time to find excuses to avoid tutoring Kylie, and also not giving her time to review on her own. That day, Kylie went shopping with the Millers. I sat alone at the piano, casually playing a few bars. The second note of the second measure is wrong. I turned my head to look at the door. It was Mrs. Lee, the housekeeper. I heard her health wasn't good, so her working hours were flexible. I had only met her a few times. Only then did I notice. Every time Kylie taught me piano, Mrs. Lee always stood secretly outside the door. Her eyes looking at Kylie carried a very indescribable emotion. I smiled. "Mrs. Lee, do you play piano too?" Mrs. Lee panicked slightly, waving her hands repeatedly. "No, no. Just listening to Miss Kylie play a lot. I understand a little bit over time." I looked at her closely. Slim waist, extraordinary temperament. Even with age, it was easy to see she used to be a beauty. A bold guess popped into my head. "Mrs. Lee, I just started learning. Can you teach me this part?" After a few refusals, Mrs. Lee was still pressed onto the piano bench by me. Just as she was about to play, I interrupted with an "Oh! Your nails are a bit long." Kylie said playing like that disrespects the art. "Clip them and then play, okay?" As I spoke, I handed over the nail clippers. Mrs. Lee nodded repeatedly. "Yes, yes. Miss Kylie is right." The song ended. Mrs. Lee went back to work. I calmly picked up her nail clippings and stored them carefully with Kylie's hair. Thinking that going to the hospital myself would be too obvious, I sent a message to Julian, who was interning at a research institute. "Serena, I suspect Kylie's identity isn't simple." Julian replied almost instantly. "Julian, what do you need me to do?" Receiving that response, my heart suddenly felt relieved. He always understood what I was thinking and always supported my decisions. "Serena, a paternity test. I'll send the samples to you." Julian, "Done. This cannot be delayed." I packed everything up. Passing by the master bedroom, I thought for a moment, then added Mr. Miller's razor and Mrs. Miller's comb to the bag. The moment the courier was sent, I breathed a sigh of relief, vaguely waiting for the result in my heart. Kylie and the Millers returned, looking very happy. Kylie's eyes were full of provocation when she looked at me. She was definitely bad-mouthing me or plotting something evil. I kept a calm face, ready to respond at any time. As expected, Mrs. Miller hesitated for a moment, then walked over and held my hand. "Serena, there is something Mom wants to tell you." I nodded obediently. Go ahead, Mom. Well, Dad and I plan to buy a house for Kylie as a graduation gift. But don't worry, your share won't be missing. Mom and Dad love you very much too. My heart tightened. This sudden situation was outside my prediction. I remained silent, thinking about how to answer. Kylie pretended to be shy and walked closer to me, her eyes instantly turning red. Sister, you won't mind, will you? Mom and Dad are just worried about me. I lack self-confidence. If the Vance family harasses me and I have nowhere to go, that's why they decided to buy me a house. Kylie carefully reached out to pull the corner of my shirt. I looked at her hand uncomfortably, suppressing the urge to shake it off. Although I didn't care about the Miller family's assets and wasn't greedy for money, if Kylie were truly an innocent girl, perhaps I would be benevolent and actually arrange a house for her. But now, Kylie's background was still a mystery, and she was an unpredictable liar. I didn't want the Miller family's assets flowing into her pockets. My silence made Mr. Miller speak up in defense, putting on the patriarchal attitude of the head of the household, slamming his hand on the table. Enough! I don't know what you want to fuss about with your sister. Mom and Dad don't favor anyone. We will buy you a house later, too. His tone, sounding like he was granting a favor, made me even more uncomfortable. Anyone can make promises, but only when they are fulfilled can one be reassured. Kylie was moved to tears, repeatedly saying, I'm not worried about Mom and Dad not loving me anymore. So what if we aren't blood related? Mom and Dad still love me, and that's enough. Words had reached this point. Even Mrs. Miller looked at me pleadingly, as if my disagreement would be too cruel. I laughed angrily. I said coldly, Fine, it's your money. Of course you have the right to decide. After speaking, I went straight upstairs. I opened my phone. Julian had sent me a message. Julian, I received the package. Sent for testing. Results in a week. My fingers slid across the keyboard, typing back an OK. Right then, a brilliant idea popped into my head. Serena. Julian, drive to school to pick me up tomorrow. Maybe this decision was a bit sudden. A few minutes later, Julian replied with a question mark. I added, Drive the most luxurious and expensive car in the garage. The flashier, the better. Julian. Done. No need to explain. I put down the phone with satisfaction and crawled under the covers. Doesn't she love money? Then let Kylie love it enough. The next day, before going to school, I specifically told the Millers not to pick us up after school. I want to walk home with Kylie. We have private things to talk about. You guys aren't allowed to listen. I pretended to act spoiled. The Millers looked at each other and smiled in agreement. Especially Mrs. Miller, she was very happy to see her two daughters getting along. Kylie glanced at me warily. I responded with an innocent smile. After school, I deliberately lingered for a long time before slowly walking out. As expected, I saw a flashy red Rolls-Royce at the school gate. Kylie, wearing her school uniform, couldn't suppress her curiosity and stood there looking at the car with the crowd. I smirked and turned to face Julian beside the car. This Rolls-Royce was too eye-catching. Usually, Julian wouldn't drive it. Now, standing in the crowd with an awkward expression, he finally breathed a sigh of relief when he saw me. Serena Vance, come here. Julian waved at me. Hearing my name, Kylie turned her head in surprise to look at me. Immediately, my face changed, feigning fear. Why are you here? This stutter made Julian confused. Growing up, I only called him brother when I was little and ignorant. Later, only when I wanted something would I pretend to call him that. I ignored Julian's confused look, grabbed Kylie and ran until we were 2 blocks away. I stopped, panting heavily. What are you doing? Are you crazy? Kylie threw off my hand, red-faced and gasping for air. I continued acting, looking back as if still afraid. That was Brother Julian from the Vance family. He came to harass me again. We had another family meeting. This time, everyone had their own thoughts. The Vance family. Is that the family with the largest tea export company in the country? The Vance Group? Mentioning this name, Mr. Miller's voice trembled a bit, not sure if from fear or excitement. Although the Millers were considered rich, they only owned a small to medium-sized company. Before this, the Vance Group was considered a giant that the Millers couldn't reach. I nodded. My indifferent attitude made Kylie very angry. Yet before this, you said the Vance family was poor. Did you intentionally not want me and the Vance family to reunite? Huge benefits made Kylie reveal her true nature in front of everyone for the first time. Mrs. Miller looked at her, a flash of strangeness in her eyes. Mr. Miller was even more dramatic. His face showed anger and a bit of guilt. I looked at Kylie's green tea appearance, frowned, and shook my head. How could you think of me like that? I never said the Vance family was poor. You also didn't ask me about the specific situation of the Vance family. I saw Mom and Dad cared about you so much, even bought you a house. You also couldn't live without them, so I thought you didn't intend to return to the Vance family. I paused for a moment, then spoke as if realizing something. Unless you saw the Vance family is rich, so you want to leave Mom and Dad to go to the Vance family? After saying that, I felt like I misspoke and quickly covered my mouth. I... Kylie opened her mouth but couldn't say another sentence. I immediately understood that what I just said completely hit the bullseye. It was just that the Millers had agreed to buy her a house, but she still didn't know the Vance family's attitude. Both sides offered benefits, so she had no way to explain. Watching the scene, Mrs. Miller was heartbroken. She sighed softly, using a disappointed tone with Kylie for the first time. Kylie, if you really want to return to the Vance family, Mom will respect your choice. Kylie panicked instantly, rushing to comfort the Millers, saying she was just impulsive and misspoke. She said a lot of sweet words, but when she went upstairs, she was clearly distracted. Mrs. Miller watched her back, even more disappointed, just shaking her head. My phone suddenly vibrated. Luckily, the Millers weren't paying attention to me. Julian, find a chance to come out. I'm outside the Miller house. Half an hour later, I finally sneaked out of the house. As soon as I stepped out, I saw Julian standing under a tree. It was late summer, getting dark late. It was just sunset. The pink glow filtered through the leaves, covering him in a layer of light. If his eyebrows weren't knitted together, this scene would be beautiful. I was wrong. I clasped my hands above my head, closing my eyes, waiting to be scolded. But a few seconds passed, and the only response was the smell of mosquito repellent. Julian bent down and sprayed a layer on me. I pouted at him. What will I do later? Can you tell me in advance? You don't know how embarrassed I was standing there after you ran away. His voice carried a bit of whining and grievance, completely unsuited to his age. I quickly apologized, soothing the big puppy in front of me. I just thought it was a play. Whether you knew or not wouldn't affect my performance, so I didn't explain much. Plus, I was afraid the young master wouldn't agree to do such stupid things, so I dared not say. Julian, I'm sorry. I will definitely tell you in advance next time. Today, I didn't think it through and ignored your feelings. I spoke very sincerely. Finally, the corners of his mouth curved up. Julian was really easy to coax. Just soften your voice a bit, and he stopped being angry. So I told him the whole plan. I wanted to use the information asymmetry between us and Kylie to expose her true face. If my intuition about the relationship between Kylie and Mr. Miller wasn't wrong, this action would also help pull Mrs. Miller out of the mud. I asked Julian and Ivy to create an illusion for Kylie, making her believe she could really become the eldest daughter of the Vance family. By then, she would definitely be so smug that she would forget herself and start despising the Miller family. After listening, Julian felt it made sense and nodded in agreement, also telling me some news. Mom is flying back tomorrow. Mommy is coming home. I was overjoyed. By then, the DNA test results would also be available. Everything would quickly come to light. As expected, I guessed right. After knowing how rich the Vance family was, Kylie immediately found ways to contact Julian and Ivy. She used her old tricks, pretending to be pitiful and bad-mouthing me in front of them. On the surface, the two of them appeared extremely angry, but in reality, they synchronized all the information to me. Ivy's brain spun very fast, inadvertently revealing that I held 20% of the group's shares. After Kylie found out, she immediately became restless. Serena Vance, you are just a fake. On what basis do you take my family's shares? Oh, look at that. Starting to call it my family already. I curled my lips, continuing to provoke her. Oh? Didn't you say before that blood relation doesn't matter? Parents love us the same. Why is it different when it's my turn? Kylie was so angry her face turned red. She did say that, just didn't expect to be slapped in the face so quickly. How can it be the same? The Vance family shares were originally mine. You are a thief. Hearing the argument, the Millers ran over. But before they could intervene, Kylie resolutely threw off Mrs. Miller's hand. Mom, Dad, no, Uncle and Aunt Miller, your biological daughter has lived the good life in my place for so many years. Now she even wants to take my family's shares? Isn't she too thick-skinned? This was the first time Mrs. Miller heard Kylie say such cold and cruel words. She was so angry she almost couldn't stand steady. I quickly supported her. Mr. Miller looked complicated, wanting to pull Kylie away. As a result, she didn't appreciate it at all. Before, Kylie always listened to Mr. Miller the most. This was the first time she opposed him. Dad, I'm still willing to call you Dad because you didn't favor Serena. But I also hope you don't stop me from returning to the Vance family. Although the Miller family is considered rich, in the private school I attend, everyone is either rich or noble. There, I can't understand what they discuss about new jewelry. At school, I can't make friends with anyone. It's all thanks to you two. You two have no ambition, harming me so I can't hold my head high. Kylie said, her face even showing resentment clearly. Now your biological daughter has returned. So don't stop me from moving towards a better future. After speaking, Kylie turned back to her room, leaving Mrs. Miller crying silently, and Mr. Miller with a face alternating between red and white. Receiving a message on my phone, I smirked. Mom, Dad, are you free tomorrow? Mother Vance is back in the country and wants to meet you. The two families agreed to meet at a high-end cafe downtown. Julian had booked the entire place early to ensure the upcoming drama would unfold smoothly. While waiting for the Vance family, I amusedly looked at the piano shop across the street. Sorry to keep everyone waiting. A mature, gentle female voice rang out. Looking up, I saw Mother Vance, Catherine Vance, whom I hadn't seen in a long time. Catherine Vance was a formidable woman. Widowed young, she raised us single-handedly and founded the Vance Group. In just over a decade, she turned Vance into the country's leading tea exporter. Since childhood, Mother Vance had been strict with her children, but fortunately, all three of us were treated equally, with no discrimination. So, I didn't care if blood relations affected our bond. I had to say, after half a year abroad inspecting markets, I truly missed this strict mother a bit. Mr. Miller awkwardly invited the guest to sit. In front of someone many times more capable than himself, he had to be as obedient as a quail. Catherine sat in the middle, Julian and Ivy sat on either side. Mother and children, each with their own unique aura. Kylie immediately burst into tears, crying for a long time without saying a word. Catherine rubbed her temples. I knew this was her sign of impatience. Miss Miller, what's wrong? The cold tone made Kylie temporarily stop crying. Mom, don't you recognize your daughter? I am your biological daughter. Hearing this, Mr. Miller's face looked a bit strange. In an instant, the atmosphere suddenly became quiet. Suddenly, Catherine laughed. What nonsense are you talking about, Miss Miller? Of course, I know my own children. In this life, I only have two biological children, Julian and Ivy. and an adopted child whom I treat as my own, Serena Vance. I, Catherine Vance, may not be a genius, but I can still count how many children I have." As soon as these words came out, Mr. Miller's face turned ugly. Mrs. Miller and Kylie couldn't believe their ears. They didn't understand what was happening. Catherine crossed her arms and looked at them, a mocking smile on her face. "My family doesn't have a switched at birth script. We picked up Serena, whom you abandoned. Back then, I had just given birth. My husband found a healthy baby girl in the hospital dumpster, so we raised her, telling everyone she was Ivy's fraternal twin sister. From start to finish, no child was ever switched." Catherine raised her voice at the end, determined to clarify the truth. Kylie reacted, crying for real this time. "Then whose child am I?" Waiting for these words, I tried to suppress my laughter. I took a document folder from my bag and placed several DNA test reports on the table. Sister Kylie asks a great question. Just in time, I know the answer. I opened the first report. "First of all, congratulations. You are indeed Mr. Miller's biological daughter." Mr. Miller clenched his jaw, but showed no surprise. Turns out he actually knew. Mrs. Miller became confused. Perhaps she was suspecting she had twins. Although I felt sorry for Mrs. Miller, I still had to reveal the cruel truth. "But Mom, I'm sorry. Kylie is not your daughter. She is the daughter of Mrs. Lee, the housekeeper. The two of them share a 99.999% biological relationship. Simply put, Kylie is Dad's illegitimate daughter. To give his illegitimate child a good life, he abandoned your child, which is me." The truth is always brutal. Mr. Miller wanted to make excuses, but Julian and Ivy immediately joined the battlefield. "Uncle Miller, look at this birth certificate. Whose names are written in the parents' column? The specific date of birth is even a few days older than our Serena. And you still have the nerve to call her sister?" Ivy spoke sarcastically. I secretly gave her a thumbs up. On the birth certificate, Mr. Miller's name was clearly written as David Miller, and Mrs. Lee's real name was Linda Lee. So their illegitimate child was named Kylie Miller, signifying a love that moved heaven and earth, but sacrificed Mrs. Miller and a newborn baby. I really didn't dare to think, if Dad Vance hadn't picked me up back then, I might have frozen to death, starved to death, or died of infection in that dumpster. "Uncle Miller, you and this woman named Linda Lee are truly cruel and patient enough. To deceive Aunt Miller, she didn't dare to show her face, waiting until her daughter was almost an adult to pose as a housekeeper to peek at her child." Julian looked at Kylie and David Miller, his eyes looking at trash. "Across the street is the piano shop you opened for Linda Lee. Do you want us to go there for a confrontation?" Mr. Miller completely collapsed, and Kylie couldn't accept this truth. She screamed, "I am not! I am not!" Then she rushed out of the cafe. I was still worried about Mrs. Miller, but she had quietly stood up. Without saying a word, she raised her hand and slapped David Miller straight across the face. The slap echoed loudly, like a decisive beginning. I stared at Mrs. Miller in shock. All this time, she had been gentle and mild-mannered. Yet now, she could angrily hit such a scumbag, making me respect her a bit more. "David Miller, you are truly scum. Are you even human? Even tigers don't eat their cubs, yet you cruelly wanted to kill your own daughter." Trembling, Mrs. Miller raised her hand and slapped him again. "Get out. From now on, the Miller Corporation doesn't need trash like you." Only then did I know that David Miller looked imposing on the outside. But in reality, the Miller Corporation was originally Mrs. Miller's family business. He was just managing it on her behalf. Just one more step, and Mrs. Miller could have safely become a virtuous wife and good mother, living a leisurely life. She planned to hand over the Miller Corporation completely to David Miller after the children graduated from college, but his beautiful dream was shattered by us. The drama ended. David Miller was kicked out, his reputation ruined. Because of the shock before the SATs, Kylie's mental state became unstable. In the end, she barely passed, having to attend a second-rate private college. Linda Lee's piano shop and all the gifted assets were considered marital property of David Miller and my mother, so they were all reclaimed. Mrs. Miller? No, her name is Grace Jiang. Mother Jiang returned to the workplace, reminding everyone that she was once an extraordinary woman who shouldered the family business right after graduation. I looked at Mother Jiang in a sharp suit, feeling she had never been as radiant as she was now, and gave a thumbs up in praise. My left hand linked with Mother Jiang's arm, my right hand linked with Mother Vance's. Now I had two mothers who loved me. I was the happiest child in the world. Julian asked. So where is your thesis on real versus fake heiress? I paused for a moment, then smiled, taking out a brand new diary from my bag. I'm tired of real versus fake heiress. Now I'm starting to research chasing the wife to the crematorium. On the day of enrollment at the University of Literature, the sun was shining brightly. Luckily, Julian helped me carry my luggage, so I was much more relaxed than other freshmen. Ouch! Julian suddenly pinched my arm. Caught off guard, I involuntarily yelped, attracting gazes from around. Julian Vance, are you crazy? I was both embarrassed and angry, lowering my voice to scold him. Julian, full of energy, snorted. Don't know who told others that I'm an old uncle who can't get a wife, and even claimed to be a child bride, huh? He leaned in close, the pressure increasing tenfold. Ruining my reputation and not letting me take a little revenge? Unexpectedly, Kylie had told him this. I stammered, momentarily not knowing how to explain. Julian chuckled, then poked my forehead with his finger. Lucky for you, I found a sister-in-law for you. If I really became an old uncle, you wouldn't hear the end of it from me. After speaking, Julian strutted forward carrying big and small bags of luggage, proud as a general who had just won a battle. Huh, can the young master become this silly when in love? Wait, it seems I forgot something. At this moment, Ivy was struggling to carry two huge suitcases to register at the University of Technology. Stinky brother and sister, you dared to say you would come help me move luggage after registering. This is a fictional story collected and edited by us for entertainment and educational purposes, to promote emotional awareness, empathy, and understanding. Absolutely no intention of hatred, offense, or harm. The story of Serena teaches us that family isn't just about blood, but about love and loyalty. It also reminds us that greed and deceit will eventually be exposed. Serena used her wit to protect herself and the people she loved, proving that standing up for the truth is always the right choice. What about you? If you were in Serena's situation, would you have exposed the truth so publicly, or would you have handled it differently? Do you think Kylie deserved a second chance? Please leave your opinion in the comments below so we can discuss it together. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Goodbye and see you in the next video.